Namaste, my name is Tejas Rokre. I welcome you to the fifth session of our 6-week workshop on Pakistan occupied territories of India, organized by Jammu Kashmir Study Center. For those who have joined us today, JKSC is a think tank dedicated to the academic study and dissemination of facts on Jammu and Kashmir. The workshop is being conducted by Alok Bansalji, who is the director of India Foundation. He is a geopolitical expert with special focus on the occupied territories of India and author of several books, namely Gilgit-Baltistan and its saga of unending human rights violations and occupied territories of Bharat. We will be sharing the links to these books in the chat box and you can check it out. A quick recap of our previous sessions for those who have joined us today. In week 1, Alokji introduced us to the regions of Jammu and Kashmir occupied by Pakistan, wherein he gave deep insights into the population, demography, political and administrative framework. In week 2, we looked at Mirpur and Muzaffarabad regions and independence claimed by Pakistan for this region. In week 3, Alokji introduced us to Gilgit-Baltistan and its geography, resources, and faith. Last week, we understood the historical and cultural elements of Gilgit-Baltistan. We are extremely grateful to Alokji for conducting this workshop and sharing his valuable insights. We look forward to today's session on events of 1947-48 and circumstances of occupation.
Thank you. This is the fifth workshop that we are doing, and in this what I'm going to be dealing with is primarily, just one sec, let me start the sharing part of it, which I'm not able to start share. Is my screen being seen?
No, Alokji.
Not yet.
Just one sec. Okay, just one sec. I hope now it's being seen. Yeah. So this is the fifth workshop, and I think the last workshop, because the last workshop we just want to have question and answers, and I'm not going to be presenting anything on that particular workshop, and we'll have any questions or queries that you might have. Now, why I am covering the events of 47-48 and circumstances of occupation is primarily because this is a very, very important narrative that we need to know. And what happened is that a lot of mythical accounts have been created for various reasons. For perceptions, people thought that probably it strengthens our account. But what happens is that when we build a edifice over a flawed foundation, it is bound to crumble. So let's know what exactly happened in 47-48, which actually resulted in occupation of a large territory that has gone actually under Pakistan's occupation. What was the situation of Jammu and Kashmir in 1947? We need to understand that Maharaja Hari Singh ruled over the entire state. He was the sole authority. He was the he had a prime minister and other advisors, but he was the sole authority. There was no, as far as constitutional legal position was concerned, he was the sole authority. He was the sole rulers. He had a large number of vassals. There were a lot number of jagirdars who were ruling under him. Especially in the northwest, there were a lot of small princely states. More significantly, Hunza, Nagir, these were very major small vassals of Maharaja who ruled over large territory. Now, all these vassals had a very interesting arrangement with Maharaja. They used to pay tribute to Maharaja. And this tribute invariably was, as I told you earlier when I was discussing Gilgit-Baltistan, especially for these vassals of Gilgit-Baltistan, they used to pay their tribute in gold dust. Now, this gold dust used to be procured from the river beds, because the river sands had gold particles, and that used to be paid as tribute to the Maharaja. But that was not all. Maharaja also used to pay them something to run their administration, and that was called subsidiary. So Maharaja used to pay all these vassals some subsidy by which they used to run their administration. Interestingly, of all these principalities, besides this, as you know, today in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan, there is a huge principality called Chitral. The Chitral's ruler, who was called Mehtar of Chitral, also used to pay tribute to Maharaja. But for some strange reasons, I think since 47, we have not been claiming Chitral. Of course, those are issues. Now the Hunza, the Mir of Hunza, who was the ruler of Hunza, also controlled some of those territories which are not included in our map today, like Takdumbash Pamir, which is north of Gilgit-Baltistan, Shaksgam, which Pakistan ceded to China and we claim it as our territory, and then Raskam Valley, which is actually north of Shaksgam, which again we don't show in our map. What is important is that in 1947, a small territory on the right bank of Indus, including Gilgit town, had been leased to the British for 60 years in 1935. And that constituted the Gilgit Agency, because very often you will find a Pakistani propaganda saying that this was a British territory and should have been handed over to Pakistan like rest of India, which is not the case. It was a very, very small territory on the right bank of Indus. And even in this particular Gilgit Agency, Maharaja's flag continued to fly. It was considered Maharaja's territory. All mining leases used to be given by Maharaja. But yes, the fact is that day-to-day administration was conducted by the British as far as this particular part was concerned. They had a political agent and they had a force called Gilgit Scouts, which was there to maintain. Now, Maharaja controlled all the territory on the left bank of Indus, which was governed as Gilgit-Baltistan. Besides these territories which we see, Jammu and Kashmir state also controlled an exclave in Minsar, a Tibetan enclave. There was an enclave of the Jammu and Kashmir state which was surrounded by territory of Tibet, which is Minsar, which was part of Ladakh for over 500 years. In fact, when Ladakh became part of Jammu and Kashmir, from 1842 onwards, it was a part of Jammu and Kashmir, and it remained even after India gained independence. Maharaja had a system where he had governors, or so-called Wazir-e-Wazarats, as they used to be called, and they used to govern different parts. There were some of the Wazir-e-Wazarats who were positioned at Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and Skardu. Now, Ladakh and Baltistan this part was called a frontier Wazarat, and there used to be a Wazir-e-Wazarat who used to live 3 months in Leh, 3 months in Kargil, and 6 months in Skardu. Maharaja also had a fully functional army which comprised of 10 infantry battalions, and this we need to understand very clearly. Maharaja's state forces for a big state like this comprised only of 10 infantry battalions, and of these 6 were pure non-Muslim battalions and 4 were of mixed composition, that is half Muslims, half non-Muslims. And 2 of these battalions, that is the 4th battalion and the 6th battalion, had actually participated in Second World War because all Indian rulers were forced to send their troops to participate in Second World War to support the Britishers, and 2 of them had gone. And some of the Muslim officers of these British battalions, when they came back, because you know the repatriation took place into 46, 47, after the Second World War ended, it took a lot of time because troops had to come by ships and the transportation took time, and they would invariably come in Bombay, Calcutta, etc. So many of all these troops which had gone to actually Western theater, and Maharaja's forces were deployed in the Western theater and Egypt, etc. They came from there, and some of the Muslim officers at that point of time met Mr. Jinnah in Bombay, and they hatched a conspiracy that they have to take Jammu and Kashmir to Pakistan. So they started conspiring from that time onwards that they have to take it to Jammu, to Pakistan. Now, as Indian independence arrived, in fact, once Mountbatten decided that India had to be granted independence, and they decided that they will be granting independence, the British gave all Indian rulers a choice to decide to right to accession to India or Pakistan. And here I want to clarify, no ruler had a right to remain independent. Though many of them tried to remain independent, but there was no option given to them as far as remaining independent was concerned. It was only India or Pakistan. And when this decision was given, the Indian National Congress wanted people's views to be taken into account. They said that the rulers must take their population's view also into account. But Muslim League, especially Mr. Jinnah, objected to it, saying that that would amount to interference in the internal affairs of the princely state. And you need to understand why this was. Because in India at that point of time, there were a large number of Muslim rulers who were ruling over a non-Muslim population. And there was a time when many of these rulers were probably conspiring to join Pakistan. So consequently, Mr. Jinnah very clearly said that this decision, who they have to accede, will remain the sole prerogative of the rulers. Now, as soon as this announcement was made, the various princely states started taking a decision. And while Maharaja was deciding, he sought standstill agreement with both the dominions, that is India and Pakistan. Now, standstill agreement was that we will have all the arrangements that existed till independence will remain in force while we take a decision. Basically, you need to understand that under the British, while these princely states were notionally independent, most of their administrative linkages were with British India. In some of the princely states, the trains would go, the telegraph, post and telegraph offices were from British India, the supplies were from British India. So all the road connections and what is the provisions as far as movement of people through these territories was there. They wanted that the same arrangement should continue. Now, here you need to understand that the government of India had already decided on 1st August 1947 that no standstill agreement without accession. Now, this was a decision the government of India had taken primarily to force princely states to accede as fast as possible. They didn't want them to vacillate for too long. So they wanted to push them. So they said, if you don't accede, we cannot give you a standstill agreement. But Pakistan, on the other hand, accepted the standstill agreement on 12th August 1947. And although India did not sign standstill agreement, the existing arrangements with India continued. Though officially or legally we did not say, but all the arrangements that existed under the British continued. And it is at this point of time that Maharaja had decided, and I think there is a very clear evidence that Maharaja had decided as early as April 47 that he will join India if he does not have an option of remaining independent. So on 12th August, Maharaja removed R.C. Kak as the Prime Minister, who many people believed was pro-Pakistan, and appointed Major Janak Singh as the Prime Minister, and requested Government of India that Meherchand Mahajan, who was a Justice Meherchand Mahajan of Punjab High Court, should be allowed to take over as the Prime Minister. And consequently, on 25th August, Meherchand Mahajan came and took over as the Prime Minister. Now, these were very clear indications that Maharaja wanted to, and this actually created panic in Muslim League, and they started sending telegrams. There are actually telegrams which were sent at that point of time to Jinnah, saying that to Muslim League in Pakistan that you do something, otherwise Kashmir is going. And consequently, what happened is we saw what is known as a tribal raid, which started. Now, what happened was that we need to understand the chronology of the events. In August, Punch, which is a territory in Jammu province, where you had a large number of troops who were demobilized. Actually, Punch contributed a large number of soldiers to the British Army, and many of them were demobilized in this particular part. And at this point of time, there was, of course, some Pakistani nationals infiltrated from across, and they started instigating the people. And they started instigating the people against Maharaja. And primarily this instigation was against land revenue, because there was a certain amount of famine in this particular part, and they wanted to instigate. Of course, so there was in early September a demonstration in the Punch town where people demonstrated and they raised certain anti-Maharaja slogans. Subsequently, of course, state troops were deployed and they dispersed all these people by 9th September 1947. And you need to understand that by this time, there were almost 60,000 demobilized soldiers in Punch. So it was a huge number which existed in Punch region who had been trained in the arms field. And then Maharaja sent troops, and these Pakistanis who had come, they were trying to arm these demobilized soldiers and create turbulence. And then there were clashes going on. And when these clashes were going on, what Pakistan started doing was that they started putting greater pressure on Maharaja, because at that point of time, if you remember, in 1947, the Jammu and Kashmir's main arteries connecting Jammu and Kashmir were from Pakistan. The main highway to Srinagar actually came from Uri, Muzaffarabad, and Rawalpindi. Similarly, in Jammu, there was a railway line coming from Sialkot. So main connections of Jammu and Kashmir communications were from Pakistan. What Pakistan started doing was that they started stopping fuel and foodstuffs moving into Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this was intended to put pressure onto Maharaja. At this point of time, as you know, because there was a rebellion in Punch, and also most of the troops were from Jammu, so the most of Maharaja's troops were deployed along in the Jammu region in Bhimbar, Punch, Mirpur, Mangla, Kotli, and some in Muzaffarabad, besides, of course, in Srinagar, which was the hub. So this was how the most of Maharaja's troops were deployed. And Pakistan at this point of time started using Mr. Khurshid Anwar, who was actually the former commander of Muslim League National Guard, which was actually a paramilitary force of the Muslim League under the British when the British were ruling here. They asked him to start mobilizing the tribesmen from NWFP and FATA. The army provided them with weapons, and a large number of army officers were given to command these troops. In fact, large number of INA officials who were earlier part of Netaji's army and had gone to Pakistan were also used to lead these people. Now, these people, as I said, instigated the tribesmen, saying that it is the tribesmen, as you know, NWFP and FATA were quite radicalized, and many of them were already radicalized. They were told that they have to launch a jihad, and that jihad was launched on the night of 21st and 22nd October 1947. Now, what unfortunate thing happened was that in places like Muzaffarabad, a large number of Muslim troops of Maharaja's army actually had already been subverted, and when the attack started, they joined the tribesmen. And consequently, we saw that Muzaffarabad fell, and then Uri fell, then Baramulla fell. You saw what happened, and there was a huge carnage. In fact, there was massacres of people in Muzaffarabad, Uri, and Baramulla. Maharaja signed instrument of accession on 26th October 1947, allowing Indian forces to land. And Indian forces thereafter, though they were very small in number, they gave a decisive defeat to the raiders in Battle of Shaltan, which was actually just outside Srinagar airfield. And thereafter, the raiders were in retreat, and the Indian armed forces started pushing them out. This is actually, if you look at it, the original, the initial attacks that took place. And if you look at it, you will see that these places, which you are seeing, Mirpur, Jhangar, Kotli, Punch, these were the places which were completely besieged by the raiders. And the state forces which were there were confined in narrow confines where all civilians and minorities, that is Hindus and Sikhs, had taken shelter, and these were being fought. And the traders had actually crossed over to Baramulla and had gone to Srinagar. In fact, thereafter they were defeated and pushed back. This is how the original movement was. Then again, once the government of India, Kashmir joined, and government of India and troops came, and you can see that we moved from Srinagar, cleared Baramulla, and then moved up to Uri. This is how it was. But these places, that is Mirpur, Jhangar, Kotli, Punch, etc., remained besieged at this point of time, if you actually look at it. And thereafter, by mid-November, as I said, the valley had been cleared of the raiders. However, in Jammu region, the state forces were vastly outnumbered, and many of them had actually deserted. As I told you, large number of Muslim troops which were there in this part actually deserted the Maharaja's army and actually joined with the raiders. And consequently, Bhimbar, Kotli, Rajouri, Mirpur, Devvatla, they were all defended and fell one by one. So they all actually kept falling one by one. And Punch, which was a very important thing, was besieged for almost a year. Now, after capturing Uri, the Indian army could have continued and probably freed Muzaffarabad, but the Indian army was directed to go and relieve Punch, because from the south, the progress of Indian army had not been good. We had not been able to even capture Rajouri and other areas. And there was a huge civilian population which was located in Punch, and state forces were defending them. But state forces, as you know, were neither properly trained nor were they very well equipped. Consequently, the brigade, which had actually pushed the militants out from Kashmir Valley, was sent from Uri to relieve Punch across Hajipir Pass, and they went and relieved Punch, and one battalion was positioned there. Lieutenant Colonel Pritam Singh, who was subsequently promoted as Brigadier Pritam Singh and became the savior of Punch, because subsequently Punch was completely surrounded and the Punch garrison continued to hold on. Rajouri could only be captured on 12th April 1948. Please understand, in those days the road communication was not good, and in winters it was virtually impossible for the troops to take large-scale mobilization or movement. And so it was only on 12th April 48 that Rajouri was captured, whereas it had been captured by raiders on 7th November. So almost over 5 months it was under their occupation. During this horrendous period, over 30,000 people were, I think, massacred from Hindus and Sikhs. In fact, large number of women committed suicide by jumping into wells, etc., which are there. If anybody goes to Rajouri, you can see. Eventually, Indian army linked up with Punch garrison on 20th November 48. Mendar, which is actually was captured on 23rd November 48. It's written 47 by mistake. And ceasefire came into effect on 2nd January. It actually came on to 1st January, but in this part, it came into effect on 2nd January 1949. Now, this is how you can see. This is where from Uri, I'm talking of 18th November to 26th November, the attempt was made from Uri to reinforce Punch, which is here. And it is at this point of time also a column was sent to Kotli. But the troops that went to Kotli felt that they could not defend Kotli. And as a result, they told the people who were there, that minorities, etc., who were holding on, that they must pull back. And they came back from Kotli, and they were pulled back. And that's what happened in this particular case. In the case of Uri, they went up from Uri to Punch and reinforced Punch. But subsequently, what happened was that the raiders, Pakistani troops had joined them by then. They actually surrounded Punch completely and started attacking Uri. This is actually after relieving Punch. Once they went and there was conflict. These stars which you are seeing, that is where the conflict was taking place. This is where attack on Nowshera, Punch and Uri were the major areas which were happening. We'll come to Gilgit-Baltistan separately, but this is the time also when Skardu was being attacked. Now, this is subsequently again another picture just to show you what happened. By this time, Indian forces managed to repel from Nowshera and they were trying to attack Rajouri. We were trying to capture this area. Also, an attempt was being made to capture Jangar, which was in Jammu region. This is again subsequent attacks. You can see Titwal being captured, trying to make attempts to move ahead of Uri. Punch. In northern sector, of course, there were a lot of developments which I'll come to subsequently. And then, of course, subsequently Rajouri, and eventually, finally linking up with Punch, which took place. Attempts was being made till August, though, of course, linking could not take place. It took a much later time when eventually on August, you can say Titwal, where the attack was being taking place. Most of the attack was on the northern side, and here Punch was besieged. Now, I just covered the developments in Gilgit-Baltistan, what actually happened. As you know, as soon as the independence was announced, and it is a recorded history that there is a telegram from Mountbatten to India office in London saying that Nehru advises, he says that now that we are granting independence, I find no reason why Gilgit Agency should remain with us. Now, as I told you, Gilgit Agency was handed over to British in 1935 for 60-year lease. So he says now that we are granting independence and we are leaving subcontinent. I don't find any reason why we should retain Gilgit Agency. However, Nehru wants me to retain it. I don't think it is correct. And he sent it to India office in London, which said, yes, you are right. And consequently, Mountbatten handed over Gilgit Agency to Maharaja on 1st August 1947. Now, this is a very important narrative, because why I am trying to say is that a lot of people say that whatever happened in Gilgit-Baltistan was because Britishers wanted to retain it. That, to my mind, is not a very strong empirical evidence, because if they wanted to retain it, they could have retained it. The Prime Minister of India was already telling them, keep it with you. And they already had it for 60-year lease. There was a constitutional legal provision. They could have retained it. So that's what I just wanted to bring it out. This is, I just wanted to tell you. So consequently, Gilgit Agency was transferred to Maharaja on 1st August 1947. And Maharaja appointed the senior-most officer of the state forces, who was an Indian, because that time Maharaja's army was commanded by Major General Scott, who was actually a Britisher. The senior-most British India Kashmir state forces officer was Brigadier Ghansar Singh. He was appointed as the governor and was sent to Gilgit to take over from Lieutenant Colonel Beacon, who was the political agent. He took over from him. Now, he was accompanied by Major General Scott when he went to take over. And when he went there, he saw that the administration was in disarray at that particular time in Gilgit. At that point of time in Gilgit, there was a force, paramilitary force called Gilgit Scouts, which comprised of about 500 troops. It was commanded by Major William Brown, who had agreed to serve the Maharaja on, and that's why he continued in his position. He was also accompanied by another British officer called Captain Matheson. There were about 2 or 3 other officers from state forces, Muslim officers from Kashmir state forces, who had also been seconded. Now, this was the main force in Gilgit Scouts, and this we need to understand, because this Gilgit Scouts was actually a very lightly armed force, like any scouts are. Scouts in military parlance are those forces which hail from a particular region and are invariably deployed only in that region. They are not moved from other regions. So they are generally locally trained, have a good knowledge of the local terrain, and are lightly armed. So in this particular case, the Gilgit Scouts had platoons which had come from different principalities, like 2 platoons from Hunza, 2 from Nagir, 1 from Punyal, 1 from here. So all the areas which comprised of Gilgit-Baltistan, where especially there were small principalities, their rulers were asked to provide so much of troops, and these people had come from different principalities. So it was not a very homogeneous force. It had different divisions according to their principalities. And in Gilgit-Baltistan, since sectarian differences were there, they also belonged to different sects. So this was the only force. Maharaja's forces, as I told you, were on the left bank of Indus. A company of Maharaja's force was located at Bunji, which was actually a ferry point from where you crossed Indus to get into Gilgit area. Those days there were no bridges, so you had to cross by ferry, which was at near Bunji, where it was. And Bunji was a fort where Maharaja had a company. So as soon as Ghansar Singh took over, the Gilgit Scouts presented him with a huge charter of demand. They said that we are unhappy, we want this. Now, what the Pakistani narrative says is that the Gilgit Scouts, who were the locals, were unhappy because they didn't want to be part of Maharaja and they wanted to join Pakistan. This is totally trash, because those demands are very clearly given in that. If you see those demands are purely service conditions. What they were saying is that our condition must be raised to the same level as state forces. So they wanted to be members of the state forces. They said our rations, our ammunition, our everything should be brought at par with state forces, and that was the demands that they had. And similarly, at that point of time, state treasury was virtually empty. There were no stores, nothing. So Brigadier Ghansar Singh saw this, and he actually tried to send messages to Srinagar saying that the administration here needs to be bolstered, because this is a difficult time and you need to bolster the administration, position some people. We need to strengthen the troops. Maharaja's troops need to be strengthened. But at that point of time, you would appreciate that there were turbulence happening in Punch and other areas. India, Pakistan had come into being, and there was huge violence and other issues. So I think the rulers at Srinagar were involved in other issues, and they had far more pressing issues to take cognizance of what Maharaja was trying to say. It is at this point of time that a company of state forces which was located at Bunji was replaced by a battalion, because he was saying that Maharaja's troops should be positioned. So one battalion, which was 6th Battalion of the state forces, which was led by Lieutenant Colonel Abdul Majid Khan, was actually positioned from Punch to come and occupy Bunji. Now, those of you well versed with military affairs would understand a battalion has about 4 to 5 companies, including a headquarter company. And when a battalion moves, an advance party goes and takes over the location, the stores, etc. So consequently, the advance party was led by a gentleman called Captain Hassan Khan. He had actually won a military cross in Second World War and had met Mr. Jinnah when he was in Bombay. So he was one of the key conspirators who actually wanted to take this place to Pakistan. So as his troops moved from Srinagar and went to Bandipora, and from Bandipora to Bunji, they raised certain slogans which were pro-Pakistan. And this was actually reported to the Maharaja. So Maharaja sent a word to Brigadier Ghansar Singh that take action. So this Captain Hassan Khan, what he did was, when he reached Bunji, he got in touch with Muslim officers of Gilgit Scouts, and on the banks of River Indus, along with some JCOs, they swore on Holy Quran that we will take this part to Pakistan, and they hatched a conspiracy. Then subsequently the whole battalion also came, but what Hassan Khan had done was that he had created a group of key conspirators in his battalion, that even before his CO would come to know, he would come to know of all messages. So as soon as Maharaja acceded to India, there was huge turbulence in Gilgit. And governor could sense it. 26th October, he sensed, and there was rumors floating around. So what did Brigadier Ghansar Singh did? He sent a message to Colonel Majid Khan that please send a non-Muslim company led by a Sikh officer to come to Gilgit immediately. Now that message was intercepted by this chap Hassan Khan, who did not show it to his CO, and himself went. He came with troops himself. And when he came, he captured the ferry crossing. And then, of course, along with Gilgit Scouts, they arrested the governor. He was arrested by the governor. They arrested the governor on 1st of November, 1947. And with this point of time, the conspirators took over the control of Gilgit. In fact, they arrested all the people who could have been opposed. In fact, the non-Muslim troops of the Maharaja's forces were butchered. The CO, the Lieutenant Colonel Majid Khan, Major Brown of Gilgit Scouts, was also arrested. But subsequently, Major Brown managed to come out and took credit for the Gilgit Rebellion. He wrote a book subsequently, The Gilgit Rebellion, which was written in 1980s. And on 4th of November 1947, Pakistani flag was hoisted in Gilgit by Major Brown. And then, of course, subsequently, Pakistan sent somebody to take over. Thereafter, of course, the winter descended, so no further movement was feasible. And it is at this point of time that Skardu, which was in Baltistan, was reinforced by state forces. Major Sherjang Thapa, who was in Leh, actually came to this place and reinforced this place, and he took over. And Skardu was attacked in February 1948. Again, here also the Muslim troops who were in the fort, many of them actually conspired and joined the rebels. But state forces managed to repel the offensive, and they held on to Skardu fort. And this Skardu continued to remain surrounded by rebel forces. Rebels tried to attack Skardu on a number of occasions, but when they found that Skardu will not yield, what they did was that they bypassed Skardu and started moving forward. And they managed to capture Kargil, they managed Khalse, and they actually reached on the outskirts of Leh. It is at a time when Leh was to fall that Indian Army managed to send some troops from Himachal, led by one Major Prithi Chand. And this is also a time when Indian Air Force managed to land an aircraft and makeshift airfield in Leh. And subsequently, the troops were supplied from air. And with this supply, we started pushing the rebels back. Unfortunately, while we managed to push them out of Kargil, Khalse, all these and Zojila Pass, etc. We could not link up with Skardu. And when the situation became very, very bad, because the rations, ammunition, everything was depleting, eventually Skardu garrison was permitted to surrender, and Skardu garrison surrendered on 14th August 1948. And after that, of course, the government of India accepted the ceasefire, which came into. This is just a map, just to show you how it had happened. As you say, this is Gilgit, Skardu, and in fact, after the August, we managed to capture Leh, Khalse, Kargil, etc. But Skardu by that time had actually already surrendered. And this is also here from Zojila, Dras, etc. was captured. Here from Rajouri, we tried to attack Punch. Titwal was there. And then this is the last stages where you see the Pakistan again launched a major offensive and took certain territories south of Uri, where Haji Pir Pass, etc. were captured by them. This was how the events happened. Consequently, what happened in Gilgit-Baltistan, I just wanted to say, an Nayab Tehsildar was initially sent, who was appointed as and took over as the political agent. Then there was a Karachi agreement, which I had told earlier also, between Muslim Conference, which was a political party, and the Pakistani state, which broke up the part, and northern areas, the Gilgit-Baltistan was created as northern areas. As I said, subsequently 1952, a joint secretary from Ministry of Kashmir Affairs based in Karachi was appointed as ex officio resident of this particular area. In 1963, as part of Sino-Pak agreement, Shaksgam Valley was handed over to China. There was huge resentment, especially in Hunza, because Mir of Hunza ruled over Shaksgam and he thought his territory was being given. And there was a huge protest, but nothing happened. 67, a post of resident at Gilgit was created, then advisory council. What is important is that in 1971, we managed to liberate 804 square kilometers of territory in Gilgit-Baltistan, though we lost a little bit of territory in Cham, which was captured by Pakistan, which remains under their control now. Then, of course, advisory council converted to Northern Areas Council. This we had already covered, I think. Northern Areas Legislative Council was covered in 1999. And in 2009, for the first time, Northern Areas was renamed as Gilgit-Baltistan. And then, of course, subsequently, a Gilgit-Baltistan order in 2018 has made Gilgit-Baltistan a de facto province of Pakistan. With that, I have covered this 1947-48 incidents, and I'll take on any questions after reiterating the same thing which I had said earlier. A nation loses its territory not when it is occupied, but when it is forgotten. That's all. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll try and answer.
Yeah, only point here is this: right now, our current entire is warfare. Third, information warfare is going on in the entire region. So in this information warfare, and भूखा मरता ना क्या करता, और वहां पे जो भी फटी पड़ी है सब लोग की जिस तरह के सब हो रहा है, तो I'm little worried. People just come down to this territory, और अभी से वो प्लान करने लगेंगे कि चलो हम मीरपुर कोटली जो अपना एरिया है जो पाक ऑक्यूपाइड कश्मीर है, वहां पे वो जमा हो जाएंगे. आज भी जो मुझे समाचार मिले कि वहां पे आटा सस्ता है कंपेयर टू पंजाब एंड सिंध एंड एवरीथिंग. what I observe all these things. So उसके लिए कुछ करना चाहिए, वो main question है. And yes, sitting at home, main thing is what I can do sitting at home to help with the things, right? Okay. That was also the very important question.
See, the point which I said is, this is not correct that atta is cheaper in this part, Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, than because the wheat is not produced there. The wheat comes actually from bulk of the wheat produced is in Punjab and Sindh. And also the imports come through Karachi port and all those. So it takes a long time. So it is not that it is cheaper. It's also a very difficult and hostile terrain. So don't worry on that count. And it is not a question and it is not happening tomorrow or day after. So you have to wait, but you need to wait and watch. As I said, it depends on what you are eventually final aim and objective is. I always believe that our aim and objective is Akhand Bharat, or which can be named as anything else, but it has to revert, because if India has to become a global power, I think that's what is required. That's my personal view. People will have a different point of view on that. That's what I say.
Okay.
Nothing. I think what she has said is right. The only thing which I wanted to say was that in international affairs, the treaties, all treaties cannot remain is not a prudent thing. When a prime minister of a country is saying that you retain it, you have every, if you want to retain it, you can always retain it, because that's a request from a country. If an Indian government is saying Britishans, please retain the agency, they could have easily done it if they wanted to. And this, I'm giving you an empirical evidence. This is a telegram from Mountbatten to India office where he says that Nehru says this thing, we cannot do that. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, I don't want to get into that controversy at this point of time, because what has happened is that both Indian historians and Pakistani historians have tried to project to the world that Major Brown, being a Britisher, took this initiative to take Gilgit-Baltistan to Pakistan, and this was an imperial conspiracy. It has suited actually both Indian and Pakistani historians. Indians, because in the Cold War era, we used to project everything as an imperial conspiracy. So we thought it's an imperial conspiracy of the Britishers to take Gilgit-Baltistan to Pakistan, and that's why Major Brown acted. For Pakistanis, it suited because the Gilgit Scouts were an indigenous force who could have taken it there. The fact of the matter is that anybody with rudimentary military knowledge would understand that Gilgit Scouts stood no chance against Maharaja's state forces. They were lightly armed. And if you actually analyze the Gilgit Scouts account, they were a very, very pluralistic force, which deep divisions amongst themselves, because they were actually platoons supplied by various principalities. The Hunza Nagir were always dagger drums, which were actually two major principalities. So, as I said, there were problems. But what happened is that in the name of faith, these officers who had come from state forces, who had seen the world, they had been to Africa, they had been to Arab world, they were actually in Egypt and all those places where they had fought, and they had come back, and these were actually, they were highly decorated. So they'd seen the world, and then they had met Mr. Jinnah. So this was the outside influence which actually brought in and which actually turned the people into that particular phase. The certain people from the Gilgit Scouts got convinced. Major Brown subsequently in 1980 wrote a book called Gilgit Rebellion, and where he took all the credit. And that would be natural, because if somebody is there, he would say, yes, I did everything, because he got Sitara Pakistan from Pakistan and got all the awards and things. So it would have been foolish for somebody not to do that. In fact, during this rebellion, you will find that many Muslim officers who were very loyal to the Maharaja, when they were captured by the rebels, they agreed to join them and use that. In fact, if you find, this entire period has been very, very turbulent. In fact, in Muzaffarabad, initially a Kashmiri Pandit was appointed as the governor by them. Of course, he subsequently converted. That's a different issue. A South Indian journalist, G.K. Reddy, was imported as a press advisor. He was actually a correspondent for Kashmir Times. He was appointed as a press advisor by the so-called Mirpur Muzaffarabad, this government, quote unquote, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And then he, of course, came back to India and remained a journalist all his life. And people praise him. There is an award instituted on his name, G.K. Reddy Memorial Award. So those were very, very different times, actually. We need to understand the dynamics of those times. And that's why I gave this, because we need to be very clear with the facts. And only when we are clear with the facts, we can articulate our point of view strongly.
Sachin Rana ji has asked in the chat box, will US allow India's plan to take back its own territory?
See, what has US got to do? And US cannot do anything. Actually, the only thing which US can facilitate is to ensure crumbling of Pakistan. That the US can do. That's the only thing, because taking over will only happen, as I see, when we get a window of opportunity. When that window of opportunity will come, that we have to see. Because considering the state of the international thing and India's emergence as a responsible power, I think we would wait for an opportune moment. And I think the only help that US can do is that it can ensure the crumbling of Pakistan, because US controls IMF directly or indirectly. And as of now, IMF is holding Pakistan by the ruff of their neck. So that's how it is actually. That's how. Okay.
Thank you.
Alokji, namaskar. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are audible,
Yes,
brother.
Alokji, there are a set of questions, brief. Brigadier Pritam Singh, about who is the savior of Poonch. He was treated very badly, and later he was actually thrown out of the army on some flimsy pretext because he, opposed Sheikh Abdullah. That's what I heard. So same way, Sherjang Thapa, there is a story that does rounds saying that all other members of Sherjang Thapa's forces were killed and only he was spared because the Pakistani commander there was his teacher. So I want to know the truth about these two stories. This is the first part. The second part is, was there some kind of arrangement between the British commanders of the Pakistani army and the Indian commander of the Pakistani army to ensure that Indian army doesn't cross Uri and other places, and this Pak-occupied Kashmir exists? I have read this somewhere in Major General Bakshi's account that there was a mutually agreed formula whereby the Indian forces would not go beyond Uri, and the area beyond Uri will always be in Pakistan's control. I'd be very happy if there is some clarification on this.
I'll give you the answers to these questions, and let me be very honest. You'll hear a lot of accounts on a lot of things from a lot of people. I'm giving you empirical evidence. What is the thing? As far as Brigadier Pritam Singh is concerned, he actually very valiantly defended Poonch. That's no doubt about it. But there was an issue of integrity on his. He was actually dismissed from army on a court-martial because now you can say a flimsy ground, but in army, even today, financial probity and personal integrity are very, very important. And though, of course, considering the sort of corruption that exists in higher places in today's day and age, that would have seemed flimsy. But the fact is that why he was court-martial, the court-martial proceedings are available, and to have nothing to do with Sheikh Abdullah or something. Sheikh Abdullah had no business to influence army's proceedings in those days. It was very clear-cut thing. It was, of course, a very small thing. He picked up something from the Maharaja's palace, which was there, for which he was court-martialed. I agree. He was a very brilliant chap. Under normal circumstances, he would have got a lot of things. The second part was as far as Sherjang Thapa is concerned. Please understand, again, never go by secondary sources. What A said, what B said, what C said is of no use. There is a book, please read, by Wazir-e Wazarat's son, who was present in Skardu, is written Debacle of Baltistan. See, when Sherjang Thapa surrendered, he actually asked all the troops, whether you want to surrender or you don't want to surrender. Some of the people said, we want to try and escape. He says, go ahead. They were given all the arms, etc. Now, unfortunately, the reality is that not everybody was killed. But yes, the Sikhs were by and large killed. There was actually an aggrieved aggression against Sikhs as far as those troops were concerned. Wherever we saw, the Sikhs were brutally murdered, actually. It was not so much against Hindus at that point of time. Why we can discuss it subsequently, but this is how it is. It's a factual state. A lot of Sikh officers, etc., who surrendered were murdered, but not all were murdered. Again, I repeat, not all were murdered. Troops came back. Sherjang Thapa was, of course, there. There were others also. The fact of the matter is that by that time, it was actually the state forces people on both sides, by and large. If you look at it, it was that side also, the people who are leading were actually from the same state forces who had crossed over. So amongst the military officers, there was some amount of understanding, some amount of knowledge, knowing each other. And Sherjang Thapa actually defended Skardu in a very, very gallant manner. In fact, to that extent, both Sherjang Thapa and Pritam Singh did a phenomenal job. Unfortunately, in Sherjang Thapa's case, it resulted in a failure. In Pritam Singh's case, it's ended in a success, primarily because of one reason, that in Pritam Singh's case, Indian Air Force landed in Poonch airfield.
Yes, yes, yes.
But in Sherjang Thapa's case, though he had prepared an airfield, Indian Air Force did not land in Skardu. That's how it is. That's the single factor which made it. The second point, what General G.D. Bakshi says, I don't agree. There is no personal prima facie evidence to that effect that British commanders came. The person who was fighting was L.P. Sen, who was leading the brigade. Yeah. He was the brigade commander, and he's written very categorically why he went. When he went to Uri, he was told, please go across Haji Pir and relieve Poonch. And now, if you were a decision maker in Delhi, you would also take the same decision, because there was a life of almost 40,000 non-Muslims who were besieged in Poonch, which was at stake. Because state forces, all said and done, they may have been very valiant, very brave, but they were neither well equipped nor were they well trained to defend them. And eventually he went. And you can understand how well state forces was, because it was a brigadier of the state forces who was actually commanding there. But once Lieutenant Colonel Pritam Singh went, he was made the commander. So the state forces' ability to defend, they were by and large a ceremonial force. They were not actually meant for fighting a war, fighting or something like that. So once an Indian army force went there, it was that. And the fact is, you read L.P. Sen's account, they went over Haji Pir Pass, they captured. Unfortunately, because of certain military failure, they did not hold on to Haji Pir Pass, because they vacated it in winter, and that's why it was captured. That's a sad part of it. That's what I... Yeah, Rakaji, I can't hear you now.
Yeah, you're muted.
In 1965 also we got the Haji Pir Pass and later forfeited it, sir.
Yes, that's a fact. And that also, again, there is a reason. Please understand, people very often talk about history sitting today is a very difficult thing. In 1965, the whole Western world was against us. The only countries which were supporting us in United Nations on Kashmir issue was the Warsaw Pact countries and the Soviet Union. In 1965, we were having a famine. We were living off PL 480, the wheat which was coming from US. We were having serious issues. And when Soviet Union was arbitrating, we were no position to say no. When we were told that it will be status quo ante, we had to accept status quo ante. And status quo ante was everywhere. In 65, it was, you went everywhere, wherever it was. They said both Jammu and Kashmir and rest of the India, wherever you were, you will return. It did not happen in 71. Please remember, in 71, whatever we occupied in Jammu and Kashmir, we retained it. Because in 71, it was a bilateral relation. In 65, it was a third country arbitration. And when a third country, which is a powerful country, is saying, and if you are not strong enough, you can do nothing. And 65, that was the case. We were neither self-sufficient on food, we were not. And that's why Shastriji died to a very great extent, because he got an input that there is a huge reaction. Because please understand, in 65, what happened? Both countries talked that we have won the war. India were telling we have won. Pakistan was saying we have won. And as a result, when you return back to status quo ante, there was bound to be reaction in both the countries. People would say that you have surrendered what you won on the battlefield on the table. So that reaction, when it was communicated, he had, of course, he died. So since he died, there was no adverse reaction in India. But what happened in Pakistan's case, Mr. Bhutto, who was in Tashkent, left his president there, went back to Pakistan, resigned from the government and led the protest. So that's how 65 creates. And you know, Pakistan claims that they won the war. That's why they have Defense of Pakistan Day on that day. That's what is the issue. That's what.
I am from Jammu. I studied journalism in KC College in Mumbai. I graduated just now. So I do not have a question per se. I just have 2 points I wanted to share with you about the history of J&K. The first one is in 1947, before the partition was actually commissioned, the Governor General asked, उन्होंने commission बिठाया था. It was called the Radcliffe Commission, and in that commission it was decided that Gurdaspur would actually go to India, even if it was a Muslim majority. I think it had 55% Muslim majority, and Gurdaspur was the only one of the two places जहाँ से जम्मू के लिए रास्ता जाता था. The first one was Sialkot. The second one was Gurdaspur. The third one was in Himachal Pradesh, and it was a mountainous region. So the army could not have used that. So what it is said is that since Radcliffe presided in Lord Mountbatten's estate, it was very easy for Lord Mountbatten to ask him to convey to him that Gurdaspur should stay in India. If in case J&K का कुछ issue बनता है, Indian army could go to the region. And the second is the role played by the King of Patiala in Srinagar. So a battalion from King of Patiala's was in Srinagar city. It was guarding the airport just in case this all war happened and the Indian army needed to fly in Srinagar.
Raghav, I'll just tell you one thing. There are two things what you said, and it's partially correct. And this is actually the type of information we get actually. Whereas half-baked information actually. We need to understand. Firstly, we need to understand what did Radcliffe do. We need to know Radcliffe was head of a Radcliffe commission which partitioned Punjab and Bengal. A lot of people say Radcliffe partitioned India and Pakistan. No, he partitioned Punjab and Bengal. And in Punjab, there are two issues which Pakistanis often raise. And this is again, I must tell you what the Pakistani narrative is. The Pakistani narrative is because Mountbatten and Nehru had close relationship. These areas were given to India. That's how the Pakistani narrative goes. Now, the narrative is on two grounds. One is, of course, Gurdaspur, and the other is Firozpur. Now, Firozpur, there is an empirical evidence that original map which Radcliffe had drawn, the Firozpur was given to Pakistan. When the final accord came, it came to India. There is an empirical evidence because there was a map which was sent to the governor of Punjab before to make law and order preparation, which was actually revealed and which showed very clearly that why Firozpur was given to India. It had water headworks and all those things. There were some ordnance factories. Probably Mountbatten wanted that they should be with India. That's why it was given. That's what I said. So that is how it is. In Gurdaspur's case, it is not what you're trying to say. The Gurdaspur district was given in tehsils. And Pathankot tehsil, if you actually, which we remove it, it was a Muslim majority. Pathankot tehsil was actually 95% Hindu at that point of time. The rest of the district was. Radcliffe took a decision and provided this. Yes, Pakistanis do claim that this is because of Radcliffe's thing, but there is no empirical evidence. This is only a matter of conjecture. What people say, yes, they have done it, they did it, and that's why it is. As far as Maharaja of Patiala's forces are concerned, yes, that's a fact. That's actually a truth. That but before Indian forces went, there was a battalion of Maharaja's Patiala forces. In fact, he had sent his artillery. But again, if you read L.P. Sen's account, it talks about them. It's a very sad state. There were artillery troops there without the gun sights. Now, artillery shells actually fire beyond visual range. So that were not so effective as far as dealing with that thing was concerned. That's what I just wanted. What you're saying is right, absolutely right. That's why I said, when as a student you must try and read the original source, where it is actually. And when you have the people, you will get the correct answers. Yeah, sorry.
Is that China is also having a presence in Gilgit-Baltistan by way of CPEC. So in the going by present situation, that whether how much China can affect or China can do anything more in Gilgit-Baltistan, because India's proactive actions or any kind of a countermeasures, visible countermeasures are not being seen anywhere, or there is no any clarity that any countering measures are there from India as far as China's involvement is concerned.
See, we need to be very clear when we talk of punitive measures. Please understand, in the terrain that Gilgit-Baltistan has got, no swift military actions are feasible. It will take months and months of serious military action and overwhelming superiority if you have to capture that territory in the face of stiff opposition. So, as I said, if any action has to be taken, it has to be taken at a time of our choosing, at a time when the Pakistani state is collapsing or disintegrating. Having observed China, it may take some economic actions, etc., but China is generally reluctant to deploy its military in other countries. After Korean War, China has not actively entered any military conflict directly. And I don't think so China would like to do that. And the nature of Chinese society is such that you will not find them doing that. Unlike if it is a directly their territory, that's a different, that's what is my perception. But again, it's just a matter of my perception, I may be wrong. China is, yes, involved in Gilgit-Baltistan in a big way. There are a section of people in Gilgit-Baltistan who says that if Pakistan is bad and India is not doing anything, let's join China. That's also, there is a small group of people in Gilgit-Baltistan who feel that if they have to get out of Pakistan and India is not doing anything, they might as well seek alliance with China. But it's a small, very small group. Culturally, linguistically, religiously, always Chinese are different people as far as Gilgit-Baltistan.
Okay. Sri Hari ji has asked a question in the chat box. He asks that, what are the forums that need representation for Mirpur, Muzaffarabad and Gilgit-Baltistan regions? Can we have representatives from these regions during the G20 meet later this year? Is there any socio-economic narrative that will allow UN to take notice? And is it possible that the Taliban, they could move towards an occupy part of the Gilgit-Baltistan region, given the political and economic instability?
See, there is a provision for representatives from these region to be included in state assemblies, parliament. We have not done that. We should have actually done it. In fact, I have always been advocating that the Union Territory of Ladakh should have an advisor on Gilgit-Baltistan affairs, or should have people dealing with Gilgit-Baltistan, because that's a Union Territory. If the government of India considers it's part of that, then the Union Territory should have some plan, something. But the bureaucrats hardly take cognizance of that. As far as the issues taking up in UN is concerned, I think but we have been rather not very vociferous in taking issues. Of late, of course, we have been doing a lot of issues. We have been opposing any projects for which now international funds are not available, like the World Bank, IMF funding. We have stopped to a very great extent for as far as projects in this part is concerned, especially those to which we object. As far as Taliban is concerned, yes, Taliban's influence is growing in Gilgit-Baltistan. But still there is a bulwark, because Gilgit-Baltistan is still a Shia majority region, and there is a apprehension as far as Taliban is concerned. So that is there. But yes, influence of Taliban is growing. Capturing Gilgit-Baltistan at this moment looks difficult, because they'll have to first capture Pakistani territory and then move into this part. It's virtually difficult at this stage.
Had Nehru not gone to United Nations, would India been successful in getting back the lost territory to Pakistan?
See, again, this is a very important facet which we need to understand. Please understand, 47-48 war was the longest war we fought. People don't understand. People talk a lot of things who have not been there, who have no understanding of the military. Please understand, the time when we went and accepted ceasefire, the conflict had entered into a phase where we were in a stalemate. And it was not that only we were making gains, they were also carrying out attacks. So the possibility of their capturing, please understand, 47-48, India was a nascent republic. We had so many problems. We had economic issues, we had military issues, we didn't have military. Our military forces were fairly weak. The leadership had grown overnight. The people who were captain majors had all of a sudden become brigadiers and colonels. So the leadership was also not very well experienced, and all those issues. So yes, initially whatever we captured, we did a wonderful job. We did phenomenally well from a position of weakness, we did. But by the time we actually accepted the ceasefire, we were looking at two important objectives. One was Punch, and another was Skardu. Unfortunately, Skardu failed, and Punch we managed to relieve. Our attempts at capturing Jhangar, etc., did not work out. And in Uri sector, our attempts actually subsequently to take the offensive further were virtually did not move any further. If you actually see LP Sen's account, he tells you what all happened thereafter. Because if you know military history, you would appreciate that once people dig in, it becomes very, very difficult to dislodge them in a mountainous terrain. And that's what happened. Uri is actually a valley, and thereafter again there are hills, and the dominating grounds were occupied by Pakistan. You needed overwhelming superiority to actually take over that sort of a terrain, which we did not have that time. And that's why maybe we could have made incremental gains, but it is all a matter of conjecture at that point of time. Because please understand, in winters, there is no way we could have proceeded further. And in those days, when we were having serious economic crisis, continuing a conflict like this would have been extremely difficult. Please understand, we had to go against the international opinion, go against the economic thing. I think to my mind, it was not feasible. And we could not have taken over the entire territory in that period. It would have taken us long period, because it was a vast area which had been captured. When they captured it, there was no opposition. But to capture it in the face of a stiff opposition would have taken us a long time, especially in that mountainous area. And if you would see that in last stages, in most areas, there was a stalemate because troops had dug in and there was a continuous fighting going on. So it was only in the Gilgit-Baltistan area where we made huge advances and we managed to capture. But remember, in those days, in that area, there were no roads. You were actually moving on foot tracks and pony tracks and all those. There was no road between Srinagar and Leh. Incidentally, Leh saw an aircraft much before they saw a motorized vehicle. It took them long years before they could see a motorized vehicle. So people don't understand. People think about past sitting today in 2023, which is the situation in 1947 was quite different from what we are experiencing today. We had no communications, we had no roads, we had no telecommunication links, etc. There were a lot of chaos. That's what I was wanting to say.